Hey, namaste. Happy Sunday, everybody. My name's Sophie, and I'm the founder, creator of The Country That Shook, a project fundamentally empowering people to live fulfilled lives in Nepal. And one of our campaigns is changing the perception of menstruation in Nepal, which means that we fund workshops for women, particularly in rural areas of Nepal. And for this work, I collaborate with local people, with local NGOs, because one of my beliefs is that this work, this kind of empowerment for women, should not come from me, shouldn't come from a foreign person. I really, my kind of how I've got to here is that I want to facilitate these things to happen. Normally by providing funds or making connections between people who want this to happen. This kind of work. But I guess what I've realised recently is that because I don't play such an active role in the workshops, although I'm sometimes there, or normally I'm there, but I am more of just a background figure, and I introduce myself and say a few words, but I try not to enforce it being like, this is my way and this is how you should do it. I want it to be something that comes from within Nepalese culture. But what I've realised, is that has kind of meant that I maybe haven't been sharing necessarily in any way my view and my connection with this subject, because it's such a complex subject and something that's changing worldwide, and is not just in Nepal, is something that's relevant to women obviously everywhere in the world. Like every woman has some kind of, or woman identifying human has some connection with menstruation, whether they bleed or not. Well, actually we all do, because none of us would be here if menstruation didn't happen. Like every single person on this planet came from a woman, and that woman was able to have children because she menstruated. And it's such a fundamental part of our being and our way of life, our existence on this planet, yet it has become such a taboo, even in the West. Even here, I'm in the UK right now, and even here, when I say what I do, I'm so used to talking about it, but when I say what I do, sometimes people find it very strange for me to come out and talk about menstruation in such an open way, and I'm reminded constantly that that's, oh yes, okay, yes, it's still a thing, and it will continue to be a thing. But it's changing. It's definitely changing, and that is incredibly exciting. I've been taking January off, or a step back, and I guess that's partly why I wanted to make a few videos over the next few weeks, because I feel like it's shown me, by taking a step back, it's shown me what I'm not saying, and I've had the time and the space to ask people what they maybe miss from what I share, and what the presence online, and what we talk about online, and the way that we engage with people. And a few people have said, like, so what, but why are you doing this work? What is this? What is it that you connect with? And yeah, I mean, there's almost nothing to say and everything, but then that kind of says everything at the same time, because it was my experience of menstruation was such here in the UK, which is where I grew up, and where I was when I had my first menstruation, there's no in my background, my family, there's no kind of want for lack of resources. There's no lack of resources. So I had sanitary towels and tampons when I needed them, or and I did have the education. I knew what was going to happen, and partly from school, but partly from things that my parents had told me. But it was, I don't even know how to say it, but it was an understatement. It was underwhelming. It was just something that happened one day, and I remember that a few girls at school had also had their menstruation, and I was kind of jealous. And I think it was that thing of fitting in and wanting to be the same and wanting to be liked, which, having done a lot of self-study, is something that crops up again and again and again. This kind of people pleasing, but also just wanting to kind of blend in enough to feel confident, but also wanting to, I guess, wanting to make a statement at the same time, which those two things are quite hard to go together. But yeah, I remember a few girls had already had their menstruation, and I was a bit jealous, and so in some ways I was quite happy that my menstruation came, the first one. And my mum was supportive, and I guess my dad and my brother didn't really know, but apart from, that was it. And I remember saying to my mum a few months later, maybe the third or fourth one that came, saying that, oh, like, Mum, when I have my menstruation, the days seem so long and everything seems so drawn out, and I feel like I'm almost in this kind of dreamscape and everything's happening in slow motion. Kind of, in a way, like, I think what I wanted was her to say, oh yeah, I know what you mean, and that, it is almost like being in a dream, but she just said, oh, that will change. It will just become very normal. So it did, I guess. It did just become normal, and the adverts and the way of talking about periods here is very much like, keep going, just continue as normal, like we have all the resources and all the equipment and healthcare, but if you're a normal person and you have a normal period, then just continue as normal and do your sports and do your running and continue. You can still go swimming and all the same things. So it definitely, it never felt like it was anything to celebrate or even to behave differently around. And I've never, until this last couple of years, until this work has begun, I've never had to question that. I've never had to ask myself, what would I have wanted? What if someone had given me the opportunity? What would I have wanted? Because that was just what, as far as I understood, that was every other girl's experience of it as well, and that's just what happened, and there was no other way to view it, to see it. And I knew scientifically that was why I would be able to have a baby in the future if I wanted to, but that still didn't seem to be presented to me as any reason to celebrate. But that may have changed. And it was about 4 years ago that I first came across the idea of honouring the cycles of the women. So this was before any of the work in Nepal really started, after the earthquake, but before any of the menstruation work began. And it came from a lady called Jules Wingfield, who is an incredible soul. If you ever have the opportunity to visit her place in the Forest of Dean in the UK, it's really very special. But she presents this concept of womb dhala, the womb dhala. So the idea that the female cycle is almost like the season. So it has 4 weeks. Obviously, it's 28 days, a kind of average woman's cycle, and that can be split quite clearly into 4 different sections. And if we live our lives through understanding this cycle rather than working against it, which is almost what Western society has been told to do or taught to do, then the results can be quite dramatic and quite powerful. Because obviously we've had like 100 years of incredible changes within the equality. I don't like to use the word equality too much, but the idea that women are just as worthy of men as men for their position in society. So the kind of women's liberation movement that has been happening. But I guess I was talking about this recently with somebody, and it really resonated, was that a lot of the work that had to happen first with these early movements was almost women stepping in to men's roles, to almost step into jobs, to voting, to all of the kind of male roles within society that had been in place, to assert themselves, to kind of show how powerful we can be. But it's also a very masculine way. I mean, our society is patriarchal, so for women to step into those roles is a very yang, would call it yang energy, which means, yes, very kind of masculine, linear, direct, and yeah, very assertive, I would say. But now that all these incredible things have happened, and, you know, thank you so much to every woman in the last few hundred years who have, you know, worked tirelessly to allow us to live the way that we live today in the 21st century. But now what seems to be happening, and what this, I feel like the movement in Nepal is also connected with, I'm not going to talk so much about Nepal right now, but it's all connected, is this idea of actually women stepping into a women's role, into women's power, women's kind of really working with women's nature rather than a woman trying to fit into man's nature. And that doesn't mean that men don't have their place anymore, and doesn't mean that women have to be all like feminine and girly and sweet all the time. Quite the opposite. I mean, there's so much within the women's cycle that we can learn, which allows us to be passionate and angry and fiery, and probably all the things that actually traditionally women weren't supposed to be. And again, men have all these qualities within them too, and women have all of the masculine energies. So it's not about saying you can't, you have to be like this or you have to be like that. It's about recognizing what's right for each person in each moment. And that's, I guess, kind of ironic, because this month of January that I've taken kind of a step back, and I'm looking, actually having some time to really kind of look at all these incredible things that are happening, all these incredible retreats and workshops and trainings that are happening to empower women in the Western world to really step into their female power, and how to support young girls going through incredible change in such a, the way that our society is nowadays is uncharted territory, and young girls are stepping into their womanhood in an environment that no one really knows how to manage. But if they're doing it completely alone, and not having support from elder women, it's even harder. So there's so much work going on, and it's really incredible. But there's also an element when I start looking online where I'm like, oh my God, I could spend years training now. I could literally sign this entire year off and just train and do incredible work and incredible trainings. But there's a moment where I have to remember, or we all have to remember, that actually everything that we know right now is also incredibly relevant and incredibly powerful to other people. And almost I knew that I need to start sharing some of this stuff, because I need to almost release it, start to release it and share it in the way that other women are doing. And part of me says, oh, well, other women are doing that, so I don't need to do that. But that's not true. Like, we all can start talking in our own way, in our own words, and with our own kind of passion and heart behind it, that allows the ripple to grow even further, even more quickly. And to quote one of my favourite and personal life mottos now, is "Together we are stronger," which is one of our campaigns from changing the perception of menstruation in Nepal. And every time I have a hard day or every time something kind of challenges me, is what comes into my head. And that the crowd illustration that we've created and that is continuing to grow and will continue to grow this year, is such a metaphor for a lot of the way that I look at things now. And I hope that it kind of resonates for other people too, that yes, there's so much we can do alone, but however we connect with people, whether it be online or in person, in community, in groups, or whether it's that we're connecting with something else in the environment, the nature, other things around us, there's something about collaborating and working as a team that just makes things happen in a different way. So yes, that is kind of what has motivated me to get in front of a camera, which is not something that I normally do. And I want to come back to just referencing nature, because nature is one of our, well, can be one of our biggest teachers. We only need to look outside to learn something, to be reminded of the simplicities of life. And, you know, young children and animals are also perfect examples of just simplicity at their finest, and just seeing that actually to break things down and to just see the world in a very simple way can be so kind of rewarding. But if we think about women's cycles as a cycle, which is kind of, you know, it's always been called that, the menstrual cycle, although I think that word menstrual or menstruation has been, I think, and probably still is for a lot of people, not a very kind of easy word to say, and therefore maybe you would say period, or I don't know what. I would be interested to hear what words people use when they're talking about their menstruation, their period. But yeah, if we talk about the menstrual cycle, which is what it's always been called, and probably in textbooks in schools and things, it was what it was referred to. The idea of a cycle is not an alien thing. Like we only need to look out of the window right now, and in the UK the trees have no leaves on, and it's definitely winter. There's a blue sky today, but it's cold, and all of the plants and the trees have shed their leaves, and all the animals are hibernating, and it's a cycle. But we know that it will start to change again soon, and it is already changing, and it comes back around, and there's not really anything in nature that is linear. The Earth orbits the sun in a cycle, in a circle. The moon is another perfect example, and often menstruation is connected with the moon, which maybe I'll talk about a bit more another time. But just the idea that the moon orbits the Earth and affects all the water on the planet as it does so, creating tides, changing cycles that are happening in different parts of the world. And that's why we see what we see in the sky. Like whether we see a full moon or a tiny little sliver of a new moon is all about the cycle of this lump of rock orbiting our planet. But it's more than that, and we can learn a lot. You know, people who live with nature, farmers and in traditional times we would have all lived with nature a lot more than we do now. They would also always look at nature to give them the signs for what is the best thing to do with their time in that day. Like you wouldn't go to do a harvest in the height of summer, because the crops aren't ready. The cycle has to complete before, or the cycle has to get to a certain point before harvest is worthwhile doing. So we've always worked, as humans, we've always worked with cycles, but for whatever reason, women have lost the contact with the cycle of the human body, because for what I don't even want to say any reasons why, because I can't prove anything. There's a lot of text which maybe I will use at some point in the future to explain in a deeper way. But yeah, the connection has been lost, but that doesn't mean that it's not still there. We're just not using it quite as cleverly as we could be right now. And the reason that it's interesting to be looking out the window right now and seeing the bare bones of the trees is that the winter of the cycle that you can study in terms of the woman's body is when the menstruation happens. So it's the hibernation time. It's the going inside, and it's when the blood is released. But yeah, so it's a time when the advice and the kind of intuition of the body is to hibernate, is to rest, is to recuperate, to allow the body to recover as it's kind of releasing fluids and releasing energy with that. And obviously the body is working physically, although we can't see it on the outside, it is working physically to do that job, to release this blood, which could have sustained a child. But this month it hasn't, so that's why it's being released. So that in itself takes energy, and it's why women get pain and feel very drained, and many other symptoms. I don't need, I'm sure people are all aware of the different symptoms that can have, but that is different for every woman, and that's why it's such a beautiful practice to check in with yourself. To not kind of assume that, well, because that woman has it that way, that must mean that's how mine should be, because it's not like that at all. Each body has its own rhythm, its own cycle, and although and you often find that women's cycles, if you live in the same community, women's cycles will slowly come together, so that you'll often end up bleeding on the same days, which is, I just find absolutely incredible, and it shows the kind of the power of women being in sync with each other. And so I just want to end with one point, which is that the way that women have been taught to separate themselves in Nepal, in these ancient practices that are in the news a lot in Nepal right now, of women being put into sheds, or which is the most extreme kind of treatment of women. This idea of separating during menstruation is not exclusive to Asia. It's not exclusive to any part of the world. It's just that the Hindu culture has continued it in a way that has now become what it is. And in my opinion has been misinterpreted from the original intention of that practice of separation. But there's records of that happening in Europe, in South America, in Central America, and in many ancient civilizations where women would have been, like, of course, as they are now, key roles in the household and carers for children and for all of the kind of elders in the family. They would have had all the cooking, all the cleaning, everything that still happens now. The way that those women would have been honoured during their menstrual cycle, and they would have tracked the cycle, and often, because before artificial light, women would have all bled at the same time, because the moon was what kind of pulled all the water in the body to release at the same time, because it connects with fluid. And interestingly, side note, obviously women's feminine energy is the closest, or the element that we would relate it to is water. And obviously water flows in its own direction. It carves different, it goes around obstacles. It's very fluid. It's very creative and very free. And so yeah, women in ancient times would have been honoured for at least 3 days by giving them a break, by giving them the opportunity to do what the body was calling for them to do, and rest and relax and eat good food and just take some time to kind of almost conclude that month. And there's an element of grieving in there because you're releasing what could have been a child. There's an element of looking at what's happened and letting go of things that have happened in the last month that you don't want to take forward into the next month. There's an element of making plans and taking that time to kind of work out what is important and where you want to place energy, but in a way that's still quite dreamy and quite kind of whimsical. Nothing kind of active and out there, like much more sort of checking in and integrating everything that's happened, releasing what doesn't serve, and moving on to the next month in a way that allows you to go into the next month with a fresh start. Like, it really does feel like spring the first week after a period, when you've given yourself that time to kind of go inside and take a breath. So that is kind of, I guess, a little insight into some of the places where my passion for this work comes from, and seeing how those things, both in the West and in Asia and in the East, kind of work together, or there's kind of so many correlations and parallel things that are happening, but maybe they're just the way that they manifest, that they come to life, it looks slightly different, but the challenges and the opportunities and the possibilities are the same. And it is a global movement. It is something that's changing worldwide. All the research, although it terrifies me that I could there's so many things I would love to do, and but I physically don't have time to do right now, but it warms my heart. There's so much going on in so many continents, and yeah, you can just see the work happening everywhere, and that is amazing. And it doesn't mean that you don't need to do it, or that I'll put it from my point of view, that I don't need to do it, or that I don't want to do it, because it's going to take all of us. It's going to take all of us to step forward. And that's really exciting, because we can all bring our little bits and pieces and our little perspectives and make something much bigger and much, much more exciting as a team. Together we are stronger. Namaste. Enjoy your evenings.